Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People's Story. I've been farming on my family's land for as long as I can remember. My grandparents started this farm over 60 years ago, and my parents continued the legacy, teaching me everything I know. Now in my 50s, I've been running this farm solo for the past 15 years since my parents retired and moved to Florida. When I took over, I modernized things a bit, investing in some new equipment and implementing more efficient processes, but the heart and soul of this place remains unchanged. There's just something special about sowing seeds in the same fertile soil that sustained generations before you. I grow mostly wheat and corn on my 150 acres. It's not a huge operation, but it's enough to make a decent living if the harvests are bountiful. This year had been a good one so far. The crops looked lush and healthy, and I was excited to get started on the harvest. The morning I began harvesting my wheat, I noticed an unusual vehicle driving up the road towards my farm. I didn't recognize it at first, but as it got closer, I realized it was a police car. Puzzled, I stopped my combine and waited for the officer to reach me. Two uniformed cops got out of the car and approached me. The older one spoke first. "Morning, sir. Are you the owner of this property?" I nodded. "Yes, I am. Is there a problem, officers?" "We received a complaint that someone was harvesting crops on this land without permission," the younger cop explained. "We need to verify that you are the legal owner." I stared at them, dumbfounded. A complaint? About me harvesting my own crops on my own land? That made zero sense. "I can assure you that I own this farm," I said, trying to stay calm. "My family has owned this land for over 60 years. I have all the documentation." The officers asked to see my ID and any proof of ownership I had on me. Luckily, I had brought the property deed with me just in case. I showed them the paperwork, pointing out my name and information. "As you can see, this land belongs to me outright," I said firmly. "I grew these crops myself, and I'm well within my rights to harvest them." The cops studied the deed, murmuring to each other. After a few tense minutes, the older officer finally spoke. "Our apologies for the intrusion, sir. You're absolutely right. This land and these crops clearly belong to you." I nodded, waiting expectantly for an explanation. The younger cop cleared his throat. "We got an anonymous tip saying you were trespassing. Obviously, that was bogus information. Do you have any idea who could have reported you?" I racked my brain, trying to think who would try to cause such trouble for me. Suddenly, it dawned on me. I bet it was my new neighbor, Dan. He just bought the plot of land east of mine. Since he moved in, he's been nothing but hostile and combative." I went on to explain the ridiculous accusations and complaints Dan had leveled at me since becoming my neighbor. He griped about the noise from my farm equipment. He moaned about the dust that blew onto his property. He even whined about the way my farm ruined his view. Just yesterday, he threatened to take action if I didn't get my crops under control, I told the cops. I'm guessing this complaint was his way of retaliating. The officers shook their heads. "Some folks just don't understand what it means to live near farmland," the older one said. "Your neighbor can't dictate what you do on your own property." They assured me that they'd have a talk with Dan and warn him to stop harassing me. I thanked them profusely for their help as they headed back to the patrol car. "Have a good harvest," the younger cop called out. "And don't hesitate to call us if that neighbor gives you any more trouble." I gave them a wave and watched as they drove off. I breathed a big sigh of relief now that the situation was resolved and I could get back to my harvesting. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked from dawn till dusk bringing in my wheat and corn. I kept a close eye out for any more surprise visits from the police, but thankfully none occurred. Once the harvest was complete, I had a bumper crop on my hands. The wheat and corn yields were higher than I expected, and for that I was truly grateful. I took a small sample of the crops to the farmer's market to advertise that I'd have plenty to sell. The day I was at the market, who should walk by but my nosy neighbor Dan? He rolled his eyes and snorted when he saw my booth. I just smiled and nodded. "Good to see you, Dan. How are you liking the neighborhood?" I asked cheerfully. He grumbled under his breath and hurried away without responding. I had to stifle a laugh. Clearly my thriving farm was a thorn in his side. Too bad for him. Later that week, I got a notice in the mail about a public hearing regarding agricultural zoning in our county. It seemed our district representative was proposing new restrictions on what farmers could grow and where livestock could graze. I had a bad feeling in my gut that Dan was somehow behind this. so I decided to go to the hearing to plead my case along with the other worried local farmers. The day of the meeting arrived, and the hall was packed with agitated farmers. Our district rep explained the proposed zoning changes in a smarmy way that rubbed me the wrong way. When it was time for the public to comment, nearly everyone spoke out against the changes. I stepped up to the microphone and described how my family had sustained our farm for generations. "This farm puts food on the tables of our community," I declared. "These new rules threaten the livelihood I've worked hard to maintain." Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Dan leaning against the wall, smiling gleefully like he had already won. After I finished speaking, I zeroed in on Dan. "Seems to me this is all being spearheaded by my disgruntled neighbor," I announced. "He'd love for my farm to be zoned out of existence." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as all eyes turned on Dan. His smug grin quickly faded. The rep tried to regain control of the room to no avail. Between my accusation and the clamoring crowd, he had no choice but to adjourn the meeting early. There was no way these proposed changes would pass after this reaction. As I was leaving, Dan cornered me with fury blazing in his eyes. "You just made a powerful enemy, old man," he seethed. "Your precious little farm won't be around much longer if I have anything to do with it." I just chuckled, which infuriated him further. "Good luck with that," I scoffed. "I'll be working this land long after you get sick of living next to a farm and move away. People like you come and go, but this farm stays." I touched a nerve because Dan turned beet red. Before he could spew more empty threats, I walked away feeling victorious. In the weeks that followed, I kept sharp, expecting Dan to retaliate somehow. I even installed a new security system with video monitoring in case he tried anything fishy on my property. But strangely, things stayed quiet. Once in a while, I'd see Dan in his yard glowering at me, but he didn't do anything more than that. Honestly, I think he realized he wasn't going to bully me into giving up my land. As harvest season ended, I decided to extend an olive branch to Dan. I put together a gift basket with some fresh eggs from my chickens, produce I had canned, and a jug of my homemade apple cider. Then I walked over and presented it to my stunned neighbor. "Thought you'd like a little taste of the farm," I announced. He stared suspiciously at the basket like I had poisoned the food. "What's this about?" he asked warily. "Just wanted to bury the hatchet," I said sincerely. "We clearly got off on the wrong foot, but seeing as we're neighbors now, maybe we could start fresh." Dan's expression softened slightly. He quietly accepted the gift basket and thanked me. After a tense pause, he admitted maybe he had been too harsh about my farm. "Doesn't mean I want manure on my new shoes or roosters crowing at dawn," he added. "But I guess I can try to get used to it." "Fair enough," I said with a chuckle. "I'll do my best to be a more considerate neighbor. Truce?" I extended my hand and he reluctantly shook it. After that interaction, things gradually improved between us. No, we definitely weren't braiding each other's hair. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Relevant background info first. Anyway, several years ago, I was working at one of the big hardware stores in my area. It's a household name and had some upward mobility with decent pay for the area. I never really found a niche there after my first year and a half. I learned quickly, though, so they kinda made me a Swiss Army employee. I could work hardware, plumbing, mix paint, make keys, prepare contracts for installs, and knew all the features and flaws of the appliance models we sold. I was happy to do this because I was building a reputation as someone who could do everything. 2 years in, a new program was implemented that I was uniquely qualified to assist with. They created a new position for me. It was marketed as an all-in-one renovation and remodel service for interiors. I was to assist the designer with product selection, product information, contracts, and local marketing for this service. Everyone involved was super excited about it. Note, I was still only making $10 an hour in 2015 for this. The problem was that because this was brand new, no one knew how it should work. The designer basically had to figure it out for herself, while I tried to catch her up with all of the store and product knowledge I had accumulated during my unique experience with the company. Issues with the program. It was way too expensive. Product to be used had to come from one of our stores, which was limiting. No one knew about it. It was a rocky start. Coworkers would call me over to talk to customers if they mentioned working on a big project, but that's all we had. No completed jobs to reference or anything provided by corporate to get us running. We made our own stuff. I put together a video advertising the service and got the nod from management to use the company card to purchase a TV and media player to roll the video on repeat. We built vignettes in the store to showcase our design ability. I'd been picking up a lot from the designer, so it ended up being a partnership in effect. The micromanager, enter Devin, the assistant manager. He had actually been involved in the project from the beginning and had been pretty supportive and brought good energy at first. But I think he got fed up with issues that we couldn't control. Sloppy contractors refusing to fix things that they messed up, slow design process as customers worked out what they wanted, and people just backing out after taking a bunch of our time when they see the price. We were, on average, charging $3,000 more for a small bathroom remodel on labor alone. Consulting and design fees were also worked into the final cost. The product was discounted to basically being tax-free, but, as I mentioned, options were limited to products the company sold. It was just too expensive to make many sales on the poorer side of town, where almost everyone knows some kind of contractor or tradesman with connections. It wasn't a good market for this program, but we did manage to start hitting and exceeding our numbers. #7 in the region for the brand new program was not bad, and just when we finally started getting some business and a rhythm around 8 months in, Devin decided that it was not working fast enough for him. Obviously, the designer was to blame since he had no authority over the contractors or setting prices. She didn't know what she was doing, and he was going to make some changes. He honestly didn't do much besides hover, bring bad energy, and make terrible suggestions. He didn't understand the scope of what we had to do to get a customer out the door and happy. He forced us to cut corners and get the sale as quickly as possible without concern for liability, for basically destroying a room in someone's home to remake it, or what was realistic in terms of timelines. Customers felt rushed and got nervous. They backed out. We came to a standstill. We would only have 2 or 3 designs in progress at a time. But suddenly, after working our asses off building the program, we had no customers for the first time in 6 months. Obviously, Devin was not subjecting us to his authority hard enough, so he went harder and fired the designer. I lost my patience. Justice or injustice, I don't know. I'm a chill dude, but I had been working my ass off for this company, making peanuts on the promise that I was working towards something. I endured working for the incompetent managers that got their positions because they started working there at 18 and made it their life. The toxic alpha male I will lead you will follow BS was too much, so I started bullying him back, making fun of him in a teasing way where he couldn't really react without looking bad or losing control. I did that for a while, and he left me alone to run the program in the interim since I was the only option. The designer and I had become friends, though, so I was still mad about how it went down. I wasn't finished yet, but I didn't know what to do. Eventually, they got another designer, and Devin had me moved back to what I had been doing before. Passed over for several promotions that I was more than qualified for. The market had been flooded with long-time employees that were being moved around. Bad luck, but I was done with the place. One day, we were sent an email link to an anonymous manager review survey. The store computers were set up with an always-on and logged-in user profile, so I wrote down the link and verified with a coworker that they weren't unique. In every department I visited that day, I wrote a review for Devin. All different ratings, some good, some bad, but I made the good ones so that they sounded bad, but as if I didn't know it was bad. I did that maybe 10 times. It wasn't character assassination or anything, just opinion-based stuff with some vague examples so no one could figure out it was me. I didn't lie either. I just said what people don't usually say out loud. He would barely look at anyone after that. A couple of weeks later, he resigned his position as assistant manager and took an exterior design position at the other end of the store, as far away from the departments he had been over before. Basically the same thing as what we had done with interiors, but he was in the designer's shoes. I left a couple of months later to work tech support for DHS, but while I was still in training for that, my friends from the store told me he had gotten fired. Maybe he learned something? He should at least have learned how my designer friend felt. They were both fired at Christmas. The next one is a petty revenge story. So my partner and I moved into a new place a few months ago. We had been furnishing the house, but were struggling to find a nice and affordable outdoor furniture set for the lovely outdoor area. In my country, We have something similar to eBay that we would use to bid on second-hand furniture. However, everything that we liked would skyrocket to almost brand new prices. This went on for weeks with not much luck. I honestly thought about just building one, lol. So we were catching up with my partner's friend, who I already don't really like that much because she is always stirring crap and causing drama, and she mentioned that they were getting a new outdoor furniture set. Huzzah, I thought, as their current one was still in reasonable condition and a perfect size for what we needed. I asked my GF to see if she would sell us their old one, which I valued at maybe around $150, but decided to offer them $200 to make it a win-win situation. The friend agreed and said sure, as they also thought it was only worth about $150, but was happy to accept the $200, or so I thought. 2 days later, I was on the eBay-like website just having a browse, and I saw their furniture set online for $200. Immediately, I told my GF to ask what was happening. Turns out her friend, without alerting us, looked online and decided she would rather put it up for auction to see how much she could get for it. I mean, that's fine, and I get it. But the fact we had already paid her, had verbally agreed that we were buying it off her, and then she listed it without even telling us, that just didn't sit right with me. She gave us the money back, and I kid you not told us, you guys should bid on it and see if you can win it. AB's so freaking lootly, I will. So because I'm a petty jerk, I started a fake email account and proceeded to win the auction. I even overbid by a few hundred to make them think they had just sold an ancient lost artifact. This is where the fun begins. I created a very convincing-looking email signature and profile to communicate with her as my new alter ego Steve Barnett, outdoor furniture connoisseur. I would talk to her in all caps to really give off those rich boomer vibes and delay each response by 4 days to make it as painful as possible. This went on for maybe 5-6 weeks. I would say my son was coming over this weekend and then respond the next week, saying he couldn't make it. Then my nephew was coming over, and again he got held up. Basically, tormenting her because I am a POS who will abuse the system to get my way. Anyway, we caught back up with the friend maybe 2 months after this all began, and would you believe it, they still had their old furniture set. They had to cancel their new set because they couldn't get rid of the old one and had nowhere to store it. I had some cash with me, so I offered her $100 right there and then for it, which she reluctantly accepted, and I took the set home with me. A few weeks later, I came clean to my GF about it, and she thought it was hilarious. She's the one. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This happened several years ago while I was working as a waitress at a chain restaurant. There was this insane manager whom I had to work with on several occasions. She was young and thought she knew everything, was quite trashy, and was sleeping with one of the higher-ups, who was married, whose wife also worked at the same restaurant, but that's a different story. This manager, let's call her Mindy, was always on my case about everything. I was one of the few shift lead servers who knew what they were doing, knew how to make the restaurant money, and had many customers write great reviews and say wonderful things about me. I knew how to do my job, and I knew how to do it well. Mindy always singled me out for things when things weren't even my fault. I would always just take it because it wasn't worth my energy fighting about it. She was the only person in the whole restaurant that I did not get along with. I had a great rapport with the bartenders, servers, cooks, back-of-house staff, and other managers. One day I came in to start my shift, but was quickly pulled into the manager's office by a different manager. He wanted to bring it to my attention that Mindy had stated on my past shift that I was on my phone and not working hard. This was not true. I never carried my phone on me because it was a distraction. I didn't have room in my apron. My jeans did not have pockets, and honestly, I didn't want to have it on me. I mentioned this to the manager, and he gave me the benefit of the doubt but said he was going to keep an eye on me, as cell phone use had been becoming a major problem with several of the servers and bartenders in the past few months. One shift a few days after that was busy. I had a full section and was sat with a party of 12 who all ordered beverages from the bar with water. I grabbed a tray, filled up the water, and handed the glassware to the service bar in the kitchen area. Once all the drinks were on the tray, I slowly started to lift it to get it situated, as it was heavy. Mindy decided this was the best time to yell at me and tell me she needed me to run the food that was up at the expo line, where she was standing and expediting the food. I took a second to look over at two other servers who were leaning against the wall, much closer to her, on their phones. I said, "I'm a little busy. Can someone else help?" She snapped back at me and said, "I told you to do it, so you need to do it now." At that moment, I honestly didn't even care anymore. So I looked her dead in the eyes, smiled, said okay, and literally dropped the tray of drinks I was holding on the ground, walked over the broken glass, crushing the cups under my feet, grabbed the plates of food, and asked her where they were going while keeping the smile on. The look of horror on her face, the phone-dwelling servers' faces, and the cooks' faces were quite priceless. Once I delivered the food, I went to my party of 12 and apologized to them, and told them I dropped the tray of their drinks and I'd be right back with a new one, still with that smile on my face. Once my shift was over, Mindy pulled me into the office and explained what I did was not okay and she was going to write me up for it. So I had to sign a document stating I understood why I was being written up, and I refused to sign it before speaking with other management. There was much more discussed in this conversation, but I can narrow it all down. She said I would be fired if I didn't sign the write-up document at that exact moment. I still refused and said I would speak with the GM about it tomorrow morning, on my next shift. The next morning, I explained to the GM what had happened and stated that I was working, while others were on their phones, but Mindy singled me out. I also asked him to check the cameras to see the incident take place, and might I say, it was so satisfying to physically see myself drop everything. After lots of discussion, the GM said there's no problem here, ripped up the write-up, and told me to continue being the hard worker I am, and I never had to work with Mindy again. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.